Photosynthesis. It's, the single most important process on our planet. It takes sunlight and turns it into the energy that powers pretty much all life on Earth. But what if I told you that the engine driving this entire system is, well, surprisingly and deeply flawed?
This quote right here gets to the very heart of our story. We're going to explore how the most critical enzyme for life is also kind of one of nature's biggest blunders. And we'll see the incredible lengths evolution has gone to try and fix it. Okay, let's dive into this.
All right, first up, let's do a quick refresher on how this whole amazing process actually works. The best way to think about it is like a tiny solar-powered factory running inside every single green leaf. So at its core, photosynthesis takes really simple ingredients, light from the sun, water from the ground, and CO2 from the air, and it turns them into two absolutely crucial things. Glucose, which is the sugar that fuels the plant and really forms the base of our entire food web, and of course the oxygen that you and I are breathing right now. Now, this isn't just a simple one-step trick. It's more like a beautifully coordinated dance that has two main parts. First, you have the light-dependent reactions, which are all about capturing the energy. And then you have the light-independent reactions, which actually use that energy to build stuff. So that first stage is all about grabbing the sun's energy. Sunlight hits the special machinery inside the plant cell, and it uses that power to literally rip water molecules apart. This step is what releases oxygen, and it charges up these two key energy-carrying molecules, ATP and NADPH. I like to think of them as tiny rechargeable batteries, and their whole job is to carry that solar power over to the next stage of the factory. Okay, batteries are charged. Let's move to stage 2, which is called the Calvin cycle. This is the assembly line of the factory. It takes the energy delivered by those little ATP and NADPH batteries and uses it to grab carbon dioxide right out of the air. It then uses that carbon to build stable, energy-rich sugar molecules. And sitting right at the center of this whole operation is our main character, a very, very special and very problematic enzyme. So let's meet the enzyme that makes all of this possible. Its full name is ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. Yeah, it's a mouthful. So everyone just calls it Rubisco. And it has a really serious flaw. To really get a sense of how important this stuff is, just look at this number. There is an estimated 5 kilograms, that's about 11 pounds, of Rubisco for every single human being on the planet. It is, by a huge margin, the most abundant protein on Earth. It makes up something like 30 to 50% of all the soluble protein in a typical plant leaf. And that brings us right to our central mystery. If life is so dependent on this one enzyme, and plants pour so much of their energy into making tons of it, why is it so unbelievably slow and clumsy at its job? This diagram here shows you Rubisco's fatal flaw perfectly. See, its main job is to grab a CO2 molecule and feed it into the Calvin cycle to make sugar. That's the good path. But about 1 out of every 5 times, it gets confused. It messes up and mistakenly grabs an oxygen molecule instead. And when that happens, it kicks off a totally different and really wasteful process called photorespiration.
And we're not talking about a small mistake here. Photorespiration is a massive energy drain. To undo Rubisco's error and just recycle the toxic stuff it creates, a plant has to spend a huge amount of energy. By some estimates, it wastes up to 30% of everything it just worked so hard to capture from the sun. So yeah, this is a huge inefficiency built right into the foundation of life.
But evolution is clever. If you can't fix the broken machine itself, you figure out how to build a better system around it. And that is exactly what some plants have done to deal with Rubisco's big mistake. So most plants out there, think wheat, rice, soybeans, they use that standard pathway we just talked about. We call them C3 plants. But other plants, especially the ones that live in hot, dry places, have evolved this kind of turbocharged system called C4 photosynthesis. The C4 strategy is actually brilliant. Instead of relying on clumsy old Rubisco to grab CO2 from the air, it uses a super efficient helper enzyme that only grabs CO2. It never makes a mistake with oxygen. This first step happens in the outer cells of the leaf. Then, that CO2 gets shuttled deeper inside to these special cells where Rubisco is kept isolated, and it's released there. What this does is it creates this tiny internal chamber that's flooded with a super high concentration of CO2, making it almost impossible for Rubisco to screw up and grab an oxygen. This table does a great job of summing it all up. You can see how the type of plant lines up perfectly with its environment.
C3 plants, like rice and soybeans, do great in cool, wet climates. C4 plants, like corn and sugarcane, totally have an edge in hotter, drier places. And then you've got CAM plants, like cacti and pineapples, which take it to a whole other level, only collecting CO2 at night to survive in the absolute harshest deserts.
So you might be wondering, why doesn't every plant just use that more efficient C4 strategy? Well, because it's all about trade-offs. It's about finding the right tool for the right job. You see, the speed of photosynthesis isn't always the same. It's actually limited by whatever key ingredient is in the shortest supply. That could be light, it could be CO2, or it could be the temperature. And here is the crucial link back to our problem with Rubisco. As things heat up, Rubisco gets even worse at its job. Its tendency to grab oxygen goes way up, which means it makes more and more mistakes, and that wasteful photorespiration becomes an even bigger energy killer for C3 plants.
So it all just comes down to the environment. The standard C3 pathway is actually perfectly fine, even efficient in cool, moist weather. But when it gets hot, the C4 pathway, even though it costs a little bit of extra energy to run, it wins, because it avoids that massive energy waste from photorespiration. And of course, in the extreme desert, the CAM strategy isn't about efficiency, it's just about pure survival.
So why is Rubisco so flawed to begin with? Well, the answer lies deep, deep in Earth's history, and it points to a really fascinating future.
Rubisco is ancient, seriously ancient. It evolved over 3 billion years ago, on an Earth that had basically zero oxygen in its atmosphere. Back then, there was no oxygen around to confuse it, so its inability to tell the difference between oxygen and CO2 just wasn't a problem. It's a relic, perfectly designed for a world that literally doesn't exist anymore. The evolution of C4 and CAM plants, those are actually very recent hacks to deal with this ancient flaw.
This whole evolutionary backstory has huge implications for us today. Scientists are now trying to finish the job that nature started, to finally fix Rubisco. They're trying all sorts of things, speeding up its evolution in the lab, trying to design entirely new versions from scratch, or even creating brand new synthetic pathways that could bypass this flawed fundamental protein altogether.
And that leaves us with one final really critical question. The inefficiency of photosynthesis is one of the biggest things holding back crop yields around the world. So as our planet gets hotter and we have more and more people to feed, could overcoming this ancient evolutionary mistake be the key to our future?